Hello everyone, Alex here from WarnOffKeys.com, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can create a leaderboard that is going to use the thanks command that I covered in the last video. So if you're not familiar, within the WarnOffKeys Discord server there is a thanks command that you can use to thank someone for helping you with your code. There is also a leaderboard that is updated every single minute, and that's going to display the top 10 people who have been thanked, as you can see right here. So we are going to be creating something very similar to this within this video. And real quick, before we start, if you do need help with anything, then feel free to ask in the WarnOffKeys Discord server. We have a bunch of people joining every day, as you can see from here. Once you've joined, you can scroll down and click in the JavaScript channel, ask your questions there, and I'm sure someone will be able to help you out. So with that said, let's get started. Again, this is a continuation of the previous video where I created a thanks command, and so if you haven't watched that yet, it's important that you do watch that. But if you are more comfortable with JavaScript, you can use this video just to understand the concept behind a leaderboard system without watching the previous video. There are two steps to this video. The first one is going to be creating a command that will allow server owners that are using your bot to configure a specific leaderboard channel. The second step is going to actually update that leaderboard message within that channel. So we'll start by configuring the actual leaderboard channel with a command, and I'll be using the Commando framework. However, if you're familiar with a different command system, then feel free to use that instead. Within my commands folder, I have a thanks folder, and within here we have the thanks file that we created in the last video. I'm going to make a new file here called set-leaderboard.js. And in here, we have to first import Commando, and then we are going to export a class that extends Commando so we can actually have access to all the functionality it provides. So let's import it with const commando equals require discord.js-commando, and then we're going to export a class, so module.exports equals class. I'm going to set this as set leaderboard command. This is going to extend commando.command. Now within this class, we need a constructor function. This is going to have one parameter, which is a client, and then we need to call the super function, which will take in two arguments, the first one being the client, which we now have access to, the second one being an object, which is going to have some configuration for this specific command. For example, the name of the command will be set leaderboard. The group will be thanks because that's the folder we're within, as you can see here on the left. Next will be the member name, which will also be set leaderboard. We can have a user permission array. This is going to be a list of permissions that the command sender has to have in order to run this. For simplicity, I'm just going to select administrator, but you can select whatever ones you want. Next, we can pass in a description. Obviously, you can add in whatever you want here. I'm just going to say, sets up a thanks leaderboard. Now we need a run method. This is going to be an asynchronous method. So we have our method declaration like this. We want access to the message object. That way we can gain access to the channel property and the guild property from that message object. And at this stage, we're going to have to create a Mongo schema. So I'm going to go inside of my schemas folder and I'm going to make a new file called thanks-leaderboard-schema.js. Within here, we first have to import mongoose. So const mongoose equals require mongoose. And then we can create our own schema. So const thanks-leaderboard schema equals mongoose.schema with a capital S. And we need to pass in an object. This object is going to be the blueprint or the template for exactly how our document or our objects are going to be set up. Now, if you've been following the series, you know that I like to create one constant that's going to hold information such as a required string, because I typically am going to use many required strings within my schema. So const rec string, this is going to be an object where the type is string and required is true. Now within here, we want to specify the primary key, which is _ID, as the actual guild ID, because this is going to be set up in a way where only each individual server can have one leaderboard. So I'm going to specify guild ID, and then here we have _ID as a required string. The reason why I added this comment is because _ID has to be typed like this, but it's not a very meaningful or descriptive name, which is a perfect time to add in a comment so people who are looking at our code have a better understanding of what's going on. Next, we need a channel ID, which will also be a required string. This is going to be which channel is going to contain the leaderboard. And now we can export this. So module.exports equals mongoose.model. We can pass in the name of our collection, which is thanks leaderboards. and then the actual name of our schema, which is thanks leaderboard schema. We can now save this, and going back to our set leaderboard command, we can import this. So constant thanks leaderboard schema equals require. We're going to import this from our schemas folder. We could then find thanks leaderboard schema. However, I have something called module aliases, so I'm going to be using that here. I do have a video on how to use this. Basically, it means that I can specify the name of the folder and not use relative paths, which could change and could break your program. So I'm going to go ahead and use this. Relative paths will still work though, so if you don't have access to module aliases, feel free to just use relative paths. Now within our main method, we want to go ahead and get access to the channel ID and the guild ID from the message. So we can first gain access to the guild and the channel properties from the message object. Then I can say const guild ID equals guild.id and constant channel ID equals channel.id. Now that we have access to these two things, we're going to want to insert or update those into our collection using find one and update. So I can say await thanks leaderboard schema dot find one and update. This is going to take in 3 arguments. The first one is going to be the filter or the condition to try and find the document that we're looking for. So we can say underscore ID is our guild ID, and we can also say channel ID is going to be the channel ID. So if this is found, then we are going to update that document that we found with the second object. However, if this isn't found, that means it doesn't exist yet, and so we're going to insert the document, which is the second object, into the actual collection. So with that said, because we might insert these, we might have to copy these right here. And now whenever we go to insert these, we're going to have access to them here. However, sometimes the channel ID might change, and so if this previously existed but the server owners want to configure this to a different channel, the channel ID would then update to whatever channel that they're running with this command. We then have to specify upsert is true, which is going to make sure that this is either inserted or updated, which is the concept I've been explaining just now. And then we can reply to the user saying message.reply, thanks leaderboard set. We can then save this, we'll try it out. I can go to my console, I can run node index.js, that's on my bot, and then I can navigate into Discord. Within my tutorial channel, I'm going to say !set leaderboard. It'll then say thanks leaderboard set. I can stop my bot and I can go into Mongo. Scrolling up, I can click on refresh. And then scrolling down, we are going to see thanks leaderboards right here. Clicking on this and scrolling up, we see the Worn Off Keys guild ID as the primary key, and then we see the channel ID right here, so everything is working so far. The next step is to create a feature that is going to either send or update a message within this channel with the top 10 people who have been thanked. So I'm going to go inside my features folder and my sub features folder, and if you haven't been following the series, then keep in mind that all of these files are going to automatically be imported and ran, and so if you have not been following the series, then you might want to manually import the file you're about to make. I'll make a new file here called thanks-leaderboard.js. And within here, we need to export a function which will have one parameter, which is the client. So module.exports, this will be an asynchronous function because we'll be using await calls within here. Our function will have our argument, which is client. And now within here is where we're wanting to go through and set up all of our logic. However, we're going to separate this logic into multiple steps. So I'm going to create a function here. So const fetch top members. And this is going to be an asynchronous function with one parameter, which will be a guild ID. And now within this function, our goal is going to be getting all of the top thanks members, the top 10 specifically, from a specific guild. So to do that, we first have to gain access to our schema, which we can import at the top of our file. Const thanks leaderboard schema equals require. Again, I am using module aliases, so I can specify schemas / thanks leaderboard schema. If you don't have module aliases, again, feel free to use relative paths just like a normal import. So now I'm looking to create another function. We can say const update leaderboard. This is going to be an asynchronous function. This function is going to have one argument, or one parameter rather, which is a client, and we're looking to rerun this method every single 60 seconds. So I can say set timeout. The first argument is going to be an inline function, and we can just call update leaderboard, passing in the client. The second argument is going to be a delay in milliseconds for how long it should wait until it runs this inline function. In this case, we're wanting every minute. There's 1000 milliseconds within a second, so I can say 1000 times 60 You could just say 60,000, but I like to opt into this strategy here because if I ever want to change this to 30 seconds, I can just easily change this value here. Also, if we want it every 5 minutes, we can easily just multiply by 5 or 10 or however many minutes we want. So now this function is going to run every single 60 seconds, but we first have to initially call it because currently it is never being called. So we can call update leaderboard and pass in our client. And so now this function is going to be ran immediately and then also every 60 seconds after that. Now within here, we first want to fetch all of the information from the leaderboard schema. So const results equals await, which is why this function has to be asynchronous because we're using an await call here. Thanks leaderboard schema dot find. We can add in an empty object here, and this is basically just going to return everything within the collection. We can then loop through the results, so for const result of results. And for simplicity, I'm just going to console log these just so we make sure everything's working. So console log result is going to be result. I can then save this and I can run my bot. Here we see a result with underscore ID is the guild ID and channel ID is the channel ID. I can then stop the bot, and I'm wanting to destructure those properties from this object and gain access to them. So const an empty object equals results. We can now gain access to the channel ID, but we also want to gain access to the guild ID, which is underscore ID. But of course, this is not a meaningful variable name because we don't understand what underscore ID is. We want to rename this, which we can do with destructuring by adding a colon. We can specify guild ID, and now we have access to both the channel ID and the guild ID. We can then try and gain access to the actual guild object from the client parameter. So const guild equals client.guilds.cache.get guild ID. And we can use an if statement to make sure that that guild actually exists still, which basically means that this bot that you're creating is still within that guild. Now we want to gain access to the actual channel. So const channel equals guild.channels.cache.get. We can pass in the channel ID. And again, similar concept, we want to make sure this channel actually exists. So if channel. And now at this stage, we have access to the channel. And so we're looking to fetch the current message that is within the channel. If there is no message, then we're looking to send a message. But this is going to assume that there's only one message in this channel at any given time. So with that said, within our set leaderboard command, we want to make sure that we actually clean this up here. So after replying, I can say message.delete to delete the user's actual message. And then also message.reply is going to contain a promise, so we can use .then to listen to whenever this message is actually sent. This is going to give us access to a message object. And then we can say message.delete. And we can pass in an object here for some options, such as the timeout being 1000 times 5. This is essentially going to immediately delete the command message, and then the thanks leaderboard set message will be deleted 5 seconds later. So we can go ahead and save this, and then going into thanks leaderboard, we now can fetch all of the messages within the actual channel. So const messages equals await, which is another reason why we need an async function here. Channel.messages.fetch. So now we have access to all of the messages. We're wanting to get the first message, so I can say const first message equals messages.first, and this is going to return null if there is no message. So the concept we want to apply here is there a message? If so, then edit that message to the most up-to-date top members. But if there is no message, we want to then send a message that contains all the top members for this guild. So both of those require there to be a list of top members, and so we first need to do that, which is where our fetch top members comes in. So I'm going to create a constant called top members, set this equal to await, fetch top members, and I can pass in the guild ID. So this is actually going to return a string, which is going to be the exact message that we are going to either send into the channel or update the existing message from that channel. So within here, I'm going to create a variable using let. We can say text is going to be an empty string, and then the end of this, we are going to want to return that text, but in between, we are going to actually fetch all the data for the top members for this guild, and then create a meaningful message in a text variable depending on what's returned. So with this said, we don't just need access to the leaderboard schema, we now need access to the actual thanks schema, which contains information about the user ID, which guild they were thanked in, how many thanks that they have received, and also when they last gave a thank. So we have to import this, so const thanks schema equals require at schemas / thanks - schema. Now we can say const results equals await thanks schema dot find We want to specify that we are only looking for thanks within the specific guild, and that's why we have access to the guild ID in our parameters. And this is also why we added the guild ID into our thanks schema, so we can then make sure that we are only fetching the top members for the specific guild. So we can now say guild ID. And so now at this stage, I'm going to simply console log results to make sure we understand what's happening. So results is results. We are going to just stick with returning an empty string. As we see here, our string is defined on line 5. And scrolling down, hopefully this will be ran right here, the fetch top members. So I can go ahead and save this, and I can run my bot. Okay, so I just ran into a problem. I realized that I misspelled my thanks schema file in the last video, and I also misspelled my import. So make sure that you spell schema correctly in both of these places. We can now start my bot again. This is very similar to the structure of the actual thanks collection, which we created in the previous video. And here we see received as 1 and 1 and 0. This is mine. So I'm going to stop the bot, and now that we know we're able to fetch the correct results for the specific guild that we're looping through, we are now wanting to add more things onto our find query, such as the ability to sort in a descending order. Sort by descending means it starts from the top and descends down, so it's going to give us a top 10 people. .sort, this is going to give us an object, and here we get to specify the actual properties we want to sort by. In this case, it is received, so I can type received, and then -1, which means it's going to sort in descending order. +1, which means it would sort in ascending order, which means that it would start from the lowest and increase from there. So we want in descending order. We also want to limit the amount of results that are returned. So .limit, we can pass in 10. And now this is going to give us the top 10 results in order from this exact collection. I'm going to get rid of this console log, and we're now looking to loop through the results using a standard for loop. So this is not a for of, a for in loop. This is a for loop where we're going to have an actual counter. The reason for that, if we look inside of Discord and we go down to the thanks leaderboard, we see that we're saying number 1, number 2, number 3, etc. And so we're looking to actually have a for loop that will mention every single individual place. So going back, I can say for let counter equals 0, while counter is less than results.length ++ counter. I could then say text is += to a template literal. We're wanting to say number 1, number 2, number 3, etc. But counter is 0, so we are wanting to insert counter +1. It's important that we don't do ++ counter or counter ++ or anything like that. We are only wanting the variable or the value inside the variable of counter +1. We're not looking to modify counter at all. And so this is going to give us the correct number for the place that we're looping through. We then want to actually tag the user, and in order to do that, we need to get access to the user ID. So I can destructure that within here. So const user ID equals results index of counter. So now we can tag the user. This is the standard syntax to tag a user within Discord.js. We're going to pass in the user ID. And now we want how many received they have, which is how many thanks. So we can destructure that as well. So received. And in the case that it doesn't exist within the document, we want to specify a default value of 0. So we can say number 1, tag the user with received thanks. Then we want to add on a new line. And then afterwards, we're looking to add something else onto this. So text is += to a string with new line, just so we have additional new line characters at the end. And we can say this is updated every minute. So now I can save this, and we can scroll back down. Top members is going to be the actual text. So let's make sure that this actually works with a simple console log. Console.log, top members will be top members. I can then save this, and I can run the bot. So here we see top members number 1, number 2, number 3 with different tags. And we also see with 1 thanks, and 0 thanks. So it seems like it's being returned in order, but I'm going to go through the database real quick, and I'll go to the thanks tutorial collection, and I'm going to update how many received that each user has. For example, this top one right here is mine. I can edit this. I can add in a new field, such as received, and I can say 10. Also, if you notice there's quotes around here, that's because this is assuming this is going to be a string. We want to update this to be int32. We can then click on update. I can then edit this right here. Received can be 5, update, and then I'll keep this one as 1. So now I can go back to my console, and I can run this, and we should see that this is very clearly in order. We see 10, 5, and 1. After we stop the bot there, we can now use this string to either send the message in the channel or edit the existing message in the channel. So we have access to first message. So if first message, which means that that actually exists, we can then say first message.edit with top members. Otherwise, we can say channel.send and pass in top members. I can then save this and I can go back into my tutorial channel, and here we see 2 messages because we ran this command before we actually set up the code to automatically delete it. So I'm going to only delete my message here. So this is still a message from the tutorial bot, so it has access to edit it, and I'm going to then run the bot. And we see number 1 is me with 10 thanks, number 2 is Warren Keys with 5 thanks, number 3 is tutorial with 1 thanks, and it says it's updated every minute. Now if I were to delete this and restart the bot, it then sends a message because it detected that there's no message actually in the channel. And so this is how you're going to create a leaderboard system using Discord.js as well as the thanks command that I covered in the previous video. Thanks for watching this Discord.js tutorial. If you want to learn more about Discord.js, consider clicking on the playlist you see on your screen now. If you need help, feel free to leave a comment or ask in the Warren Keys Discord, which can be found in the video description.